So I think we can go ahead and just get started and welcome people in. Do you want to start sharing your slide for me, Thomas? Thank you. And there we go. So I want to welcome everyone to night three out of 3. So if you made it all the way through, you're very well prepared to implement this into whatever curricula that you want to implement it to. We have had such an engaged audience for these sessions, and we really hope that that continues for this one. We have some new presenters for you with some new perspectives, and I'm just really excited to see how much you all engage with this material. So I want to wish you a very warm welcome for the third one. If it's your first one, that's great. There's going to be recordings for the first and the second one in the chat. It's already there, and it'll be shared again if you didn't see it before. And Thomas, do you want to say anything to welcome people, or should I just go into the agenda for today?
No, welcome back. I encourage you to go check out the part 1 and part 2 recordings, and especially use those as a resource. So whether you're an educator that wants to go back and refer to some of this material, or you're an IHL volunteer looking to engage educators in your area with this material, it's a great resource without them having to worry about having missed the night. It's all there. Thanks.
Okay, let's jump to the next slide. So I just want to reiterate for you the goals of this program. It is to provide educators with the knowledge necessary to teach students fundamental principles and applications of international humanitarian law. We've covered a lot of those already, and today we're going to talk about accountability, a different side. It's also to provide educators with some suggested strategies on how to teach international humanitarian law by providing examples of exercises used by other educators. And that's why we have our whole resource packet. And that is basically what we're doing in these sessions, is we're going through the exercises either to explain them or we demonstrate them. We do it in different ways. And then we have experienced educators with us who already have implemented them that could talk about tips and tricks and experiences and things that you should consider when trying to implement and adjust them for your students. Let's jump to the next slide. Last time, we focused on the law in action. We looked at some of the exercises, and then we also did take a look at some outside resources that were the Canadian animated website, where we followed a person through decisions in an armed conflict, and then also our YouTube channel, where we have multiple different lectures on IHL, and also some focused on popular culture in IHL, which can be easily digestible also for a younger audience. Next slide, please. Today, we will focus on the next step. So first, violations of IHL, and then accountability for IHL violations. The first part, session 4 out of 5, will be presented by Lisa Westerfield today. And then the 5th will be presented by Natalie Landau, one of our brilliant interns with the IHL team. And you can go to the next slide, and I will give the word over to Lisa from here.
Good evening, everybody. So I just want to quickly introduce myself. I have been teaching for 20 plus years. I don't even remember how long right now. And I moved to Maryland about 10 years ago now. And I first started in a different charter school, which was opening as well. So, and moved now on to a new charter school, which I'm helping to open, and we'll have our first graduating class this year. And the name of the charter school I'm working at currently is Aspira Charter High School, which K-8 is a Spanish immersion school, but in the high school, it is not immersion any longer. I've written a curriculum that I have been teaching for about 9 years called the Global Leadership Pathway, which I focus on IHL during my 2nd year of teaching. So I've been teaching this particular curriculum for, about 7 years for the 2nd year. Also, I'll teach dual enrollment psychology, as well as AP microeconomics. So you can move on to the next slide. So what I want to do is I want to take you through how I would teach this to my students and kind of give you kind of an insight on what I found in the classroom to be beneficial, as well as just little techniques that I found work really well. So tonight we are going to focus on the objectives, which is to be able to identify violations of IHL, explore the issues of child soldiers, and to understand how one violation can lead to another. Key concepts we're going to talk about is human dignity, the bystander, social pressure, dilemma, and humanitarian act. So you can change slides. So let's start off with what I usually do when I'm starting a new topic, which is this idea of exploration. And this is taken from IHL resources as well. So you can find it there. But I like to start off with a discussion point with my students, which today's discussion point will be, what should be done when the law has been broken? So thinking about that question in the chat, I want you to answer number 1. If you break a rule or misbehave, what should you do? Why? What should happen to you and why? So this is supposed to be used to help students start making a connection about what we're going to talk about. So if you'd like to take, I don't know, about 30 seconds and just real briefly in the chat, tell me, if you break a rule, what should you do? And why should you do that? And what should happen to you because of breaking that rule and why? So I'll give you about 30 seconds or so for those who want to participate. Okay, fess up and take the consequences. And when I give this to the students, I let them determine what the rule is that they broke. Okay, so those who chose to participate did state. On the other hand, most of us disobey, excuse me, posted speed limits. Yeah, it's not like we can go turn ourselves in every time we're breaking the law and speeding, that's for sure. Okay, so the second question kind of leads the students into actually looking at the content. So what happens to people who've been accused of violating IHL? What are the similarities and differences between everyday crimes and breaking the rules of war? So go ahead and write in the chat again if you have an idea of what might happen to people, and maybe one similarity and or difference in those crimes. Okay. Very good. First thing happens in investigation. Very good. All right, thank you. So these two questions are to lead students into kind of thinking like, what are we going to talk about today in the class? So I want you also, if you can, please let me know in the chat if you're not able to. But if you have a device or if you can open up another window on another tab, go to www.menti.com or just type in menti.com. And I want you to use this code to enter, and it's 2 survey questions. And I want to see like what basically, how would you all answer this question? And it'll do a quick survey. It's just 2 questions. And then I want to show you how students answered it. So if you're having any trouble getting to that, let me know. I can put it in the chat as well. I've been just typing in menti.com in the URL and it's been working. And the code is so while you're doing that, I'm going to look to see.
And Lisa, let me know. I will stop sharing and let you pull up the Menti results whenever you're ready.
Okay. So far we got 3 votes. So I want to see if anybody else wants to participate first. Trying to get it to show me here so I can show you what came out. All right, so you want to stop sharing for a second, then I'll share this new screen so you guys can see the results that you gave me. So should people who break the rules of war be punished? Majority of you said yes, which is good. And the next question, let's see if I can find it here. Let me go back. Trying to get it to let me go back here. And then the other result was, all right, so when war is over, should people have broken the rules be put on trial? Majority of you said yes to trial. Be exposed to public but not put on trial. You all said basically no. Be forgiven, 2.8 results, and be granted amnesty. You only got a 0.5 result. So now let me show you. I'm gonna the information. I'm gonna stop sharing, and then Thomas, you can share again. So one of the cool things about Menti is it gives you an instant response about what the students are saying. So you can go ahead and click again to the next slide, please. So this is from the module for IHL resources. And you can see it's kind of dated a little bit, but that's okay. I've been doing this with my students for about 8 years, 7 years, something like that. And the results are still pretty accurate. So just like you said, yes, they should be prosecuted, I believe is what punished. But majority of you said be put on trial. One thing that's been interesting since, excuse me, since 9/11, since this cancel culture, actually what we started seeing is we're seeing a little bit more response in this idea of being publicly exposed, but not put on trial. So it's still the majority is being put on trial. That hasn't changed, but we're seeing a little higher percentage in these other areas, especially that second one. Okay, Thomas, you can click if you like. So with my students, I also do a child soldier project, but before we start that project, we talk about what they believe the minimum age of combatants should be. One of the interesting things about this presentation that we talk about is the fact that a lot of times they're looking at it through a lens of only this United States culture, Western culture. So they're not thinking about the fact that other cultures may practice different ways of adulthood, becoming of age. And so my students always talk about how frustrated they get sometimes when I just basically give them the question, what is a child? And through that question, I want them to actually think about, at what point, yeah, we're children, but at what point is the innocence of a child broken? And we talk about this idea of having this debate about the age at which a young person can no longer be considered a child, or the age of a teenager, or the age of what an adult is. So if we think about Native American culture, a lot of times at 10 years old, they're going through some type of rite of passage in order to reach adulthood. And that could be, something totally different than a lot of our students have experienced. We also talk about this idea of basic needs of children. And when those basic needs aren't being met, does that cause a child to possibly want to divert and go kind of follow somebody else who's going to provide those needs for them? And then what can happen if these needs are not met? And that's where we get this idea of how child soldiers are kind of being developed, and how these coyotes, if you want to call them, are kind of trying to take control of them. So that's kind of how we start this exploration of child soldiers. Okay, Thomas, you can change the slide. So we're going to watch a video and I want you to know that it is kind of difficult to watch because it's an interview about a child soldier and about the fact that they don't want to go back. They've been rescued and they are being interviewed, and in the resources, you can actually do a role play with this. I choose not to do the role play because in the resources, it's asking you to have the kids act out killing someone. And with all the school shootings and things like that, I've gotten away from using that. So Thomas, if you want to do the next slide and start the video.
Okay, and somebody just alert me by audio if you can't hear it, but I should have it set up correctly.
Today, more than 300,000 children participate in armed conflict on all four corners of the globe. These boys and girls, some as young as 7, serve alongside adults in government forces, rebel opposition groups, and guerrilla armies.
They killed my brother, they killed my grandmother, and they killed my little sister. Okay? So that make me to do what I'm not supposed to do. It may happen to you. If you're sitting somewhere, you hear the day of tomorrow, say, they kill your mother, they kill your father. You want to retreat, you want to say, I will revenge to do, to save, to get back my mother feeling. No, it will never happen. But I do that because I used to love my grandmother. She used to take care of me, and also my brother. That's why I did that. It was not my intention to do what I'm not supposed to do. I want to free myself. I want my conscience to be clear. That's why I help little children. I never went against to do what I'm not supposed to do, no.
And my name is Ava Kilo, but my real name is Ibrahim.
Why is your name Hitler Killer?
Huh?
Why?
It's my fighting knee. The knee what they gave me in the bush.
Who gave it to you?
My boss man.
Who is Hitler?
I don't know. I think I went there because they killed my father. So that's why I went there to join them because my friends were going too. So I went with my friends there to join them.
Because you wanted to find the man who killed your father?
Yes.
You know him?
Yes.
So what did you do?
I saw him and he came He came to fight me and I killed him. I went in the bush for them and I joined the people. I was fighting for them. So they used to see the way I do, they gave me gun.
You have seen many people killed?
Yeah.
How many?
Many people kill plenty people. So, people are not fighting, people are not rebel. The rebel got to the boss, kill them.
And you have killed people yourself?
Yeah,
Many?
yeah.
How many?
About 10 people.
How?
Because they came to attack me, so I fought them too. Because they were coming to kill me.
And how did you do this?
They were coming my weapons, and I advance it. When all of them come, I can hide. When we come, he fire, and I can shoot him. I want to be a soldier because they killed my father, so I went there to be a soldier.
My name is Kono Abubakar Kamara, commonly called Kono Mother Blessing. I have 978 men under my command, and I have about 176 of Hela the Killer. Some of them are 9, some of them are 10, some are 11, the highest is 12. They go on the advanced team. That is, they are at the forefront of the war. The soldiers that are above 20, 21, 22, 23, when I tell them to do certain operations like that, they'll always be afraid. But like Hillary Killer, like my other 75 soldiers, I get like Hillary Killer, like small soldiers, they are not afraid. I trust them and they are my best because they execute any order that I give them. But when I say, okay, Hillary Killer, you get that man, immediately they will get you. When I say, okay, that man should be executed, for sure.
Lisa, do you want me to keep playing, or do you want to? You could just stop here.
You can stop now if you want, because I know I'm getting internet connection issues, so I don't even know if other people are getting that same.
Too easy.
So it's okay. You could just advance to the next one. We'll just move on. All right. So discussion questions that you could be asking, and I'm just going to have you think about one of these. But these are the questions that the resource offers of what are your reactions to this video. The one you could talk about the 3 different people. You could talk about the first lady who is talking about avenging her grandmother. We could talk about the young boy who is trying to avenge his father, or you could even talk about the recruiter himself, talking about what is it about children that is easy to recruit and causes them to work hard for him and to kill for him. So the students really enjoy, I don't want to say enjoy, but that's not the right word. They really get into talking about that they are so surprised and shocked that this young boy would want to kill another person at his age. Also talking in the video about human dignity, bringing back in the previous module information and talking about how that is affected and what that actually does to an individual and their dignity itself. But the one question that I really talk about a lot of times with my students is what should be the minimum age to participate in hostilities. So we go in and we look at like the United States military, we look at European military, we look at when you're allowed to join from different countries. And we have students kind of look at, do they agree with that age? Thinking about child development, thinking about what our brains are doing and processing at certain age groups. When should be the actual age that is allowed? And thankfully, the Geneva Conventions have established, I believe it's 15, and they've given an age for a minimum age for any individual to be allowed to join or to be recruited by the military. Thomas, you can go ahead and advance if you like. So another resource I use a lot is how one violation leads to another. So you can go ahead and advance again. And this resource is really good about getting kids to think about what are the consequences to every action. So the way you use this is you think of one or two, I usually do one chain of consequence per activity, but they would actually come up with a certain type of consequence that is a violation of IHL. So for example, if the placing of a gun on a roof of a hospital by one side in a conflict, which then leads to an attack on that hospital by the other side. So what is the chain of consequence? So you would write the initial consequence, placing a gun on top of a hospital during a conflict. And then the students would break out, well, what is going to happen? What are the consequences to that one action? And that would be the hospital being bombed because now it's a target, because it has weapons on it. Another example could be one side's killing someone they have taken prisoner, leading to another side's killing a person for revenge. So students would actually go through and think in detail about all of the small consequences that could occur because of that one violation. And the example here on the screen for you to see is when soldiers change uniforms, what happens, right? So remember, one of the provisions is that you have to be able to identify a combatant versus a civilian. So when soldiers are disguised in civilian clothes, you can see, one, you cannot distinguish between the combatants and the civilians. And the other thing another consequence of that could be suspicion that other disguises may be used. So this is a great resource to use for really anything, but to get them to really think about the violations of one we consider small act that could lead to a larger problem in the future. Like, again, the hospital with a gun on top of the hospital, now that hospital becomes a target. So Thomas, you can move on. So the takeaways for this is there are various reasons why violations of IHL take place. So fear, retaliation, hatred, etc. Under IHL, certain categories of persons are recognized as particularly vulnerable and thus entitled to special protection. Children are a protected group. One form of protecting children is setting and respecting a minimum age for recruiting children into armed forces or armed groups or using them in armed conflicts. Violation of IHL often set off a chain reaction leading to further violations. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. I think we'll have some time at the end. I think that's the best time, right, Thea, of figuring this out? Or
if you want to do questions now, we can, and then we can also do another round of questions at the end if you would like, after Natalie has gone.
Okay. So if you have any questions, we can take about maybe 3 minutes, I think. I think I'm right on the schedule. So perfect.
I have a question for you, Lisa, while we wait for people to potentially type something out in the chat. So this topic about child soldiers, is that something that you have covered? And if you have covered it, whether you show the video or not, how do you approach a topic like that potentially can be very difficult to deal with in a classroom? Is there something people should be thinking about?
Right, yeah, because we don't know the background of all the kids. So you really need to be very, I don't want to say walk on eggshells, but I do a lot of stuff leading up with like trusting, understanding that this is a safe environment. You do not have to answer if you're not comfortable. We do with the whole, when we start the first part of the mods, because this is already halfway into the curriculum, they've already kind of gotten through the dilemmas and started understanding what they're going to be facing anyway. So I never jump into this. I never even do this with freshmen. Like that age group, what is that, 13, 14? I would not personally do this with them because I don't think they're mature enough to process what they're seeing. Even though I know we read A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bey. We do read that in this class. And a lot of the kids have said they've already read it, you know, like in middle school or something like that, but they never have the visual stuff that go with it. They just talk about it. So this is more highly visual, and I don't know, it's personal, you know, for a lot of these kids to see some of this. Because for instance, I'll be teaching this for the first time in my new school next year. And I am a little nervous because I got kids coming from Colombia, Venezuela. And so, you know, I'm going to really be doing a lot of front end talking about the topics we're going to cover and to make sure they feel comfortable enough to kind of, you know, share if this is going to be hard for them and talk to their parents as well.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
I don't see any questions in the chat at this moment in time, so let's just move on to my quick 2 slides before we move on to Natalie. So you remember from last week, we spoke briefly about the intersection between international human rights law and humanitarian law. And now that we're moving into accountability, I just wanted to do a little snippet of sort of the overlap between IHL and International Criminal Law, ICL, for those who like abbreviations. And just briefly, how it's defined, international criminal law is just a body of laws governing international crimes and their repression, as well as rules addressing conflict and cooperation between national criminal law systems. So it covers a lot. The most recent and prominent source and a source you might have heard about is the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court. This is sort of the legal instrument that created the International Criminal Court, but also it has all of the laws that they rely on in there. It's its organizing statute, it's what it's called. So the International Criminal Court is a standing court, meaning it's permanent, and it investigates and, where warranted, tries individuals charged with the gravest crimes of concern to the international community, is how it's written in the statute. And that is, for now, 4 different types of crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. There are other potential crimes that different actors would like to be included, like terrorism, ecocide, piracy, are also things that have been advocated for including, but they are currently not a part of the mandate. Generally, the way that the International Criminal Law works and the way the International Criminal Court works is that it relies primarily on domestic courts to prosecute these crimes, and then it's a complementary court, meaning if the country is unable or unwilling to prosecute, then they will, in the gravest instances, do that. And then there's a whole thing about jurisdiction and not jurisdiction, which we won't go into today, but that there are resources on our YouTube channel if you would like to check that out. Hop on to the next slide for me, Thomas. In addition to this International Criminal Court, which is a standing court, there are a number of ad hoc tribunals. One of them is International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. One is for Rwanda. There are currently multiple different tribunals that are either already established or will be or in the process of being established, and they operate either as a fully international tribunal or as a hybrid tribunal, where you have part domestic, part international participation and organization of the court. The ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, is the first war crimes court created by the UN and the first international war crimes tribunal since the Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals from the Second World War. And it was established by the Security Council under Chapter 7. I am just going to tell you very briefly a little bit about the court and just highlight for you one of the most famous cases that you might have heard about and that your students might have heard about on the news or in history books. Key objective of ICTY is to try those individuals most responsible for appalling acts such as murder, torture, rape, enslavement, destruction of property, and other crimes listed in the statute. And this is very typical for international criminal law, that they're not trying to target every single person who committed a crime during a conflict or in a relation to an atrocity. They are trying to take the highest ranking people, the most culpable. And this particular court has charged over 160 people, which include heads of state, prime ministers, army chiefs of staff, interior ministers, and other high, mid-level political, military, and police leaders. It has also tried to be conscious about the ethnic composition of this conflict and tried members of all ethnic groups involved in the conflict. Also, a typical aspect of an international tribunal is that they do pay attention to any outward appearance of bias towards any of the parties of the conflict, and so they try to be as balanced as possible. One of the people tried by this tribunal was Ratko Mladic, which you might have heard about. He was a high-ranking military officer in the Bosnian Serb army. And without going into the case, he was tried for a number of different international crimes, arrested in 2011. And he had 2 counts of genocide, 5 counts of crimes against humanity, and war crimes. 4 counts of war crimes. And then in 2017, he was convicted then of 10 out of the 11 total counts, where one of the genocide counts, he was found not guilty. And so as we talk about accountability, I want you to keep in mind that this is just one of the paths of accountability is international criminal law, holding people individually responsible. There are also multiple other ways, but this is maybe the most complex from a legal perspective, so I thought I would just cover that for you before Natalie takes us into the general module for accountability. And I'll leave it to Natalie.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Taya. I'm going to quickly share my screen as well, and hopefully we can get started. Let's see. Always these technical issues. Can everyone see my screen and just the presentation?
Looks good.
Good. Okay, wonderful. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Landau. I'm a legal intern with the IHL team at the American Red Cross, and I'm also a law student at American University Washington College of Law. I just want to say first, it's really great to have this opportunity to speak to you all. My mom was a high school special education teacher for many years, so I know how hard educators work and the incredible impact that you all have on students. But without further delay, I'll get into this section. So, as we've previously discussed, we have looked at a few topics, including humanitarian acts, the basic rules of IHL and the Geneva Conventions, the law in action, and violations of IHL. Section 5, which it should say Section 5 at the top, sorry about that. Section 5 moves into accountability of these violations. It presents a number of ways of dealing with IHL violations, such as bringing perpetrators to trial, uncovering the truth, reconciliation, and forms of reparation. By examining both accountability and reconciliation mechanisms, this section asks participants to consider why one would choose to address or not address violations of IHL. it then explores the various ways of addressing them. Here you can see that the primary objectives of this section are to, 1, explore how dealing or not dealing with IHL violations can affect a society after armed conflict. 2, to understand who is responsible for addressing IHL violations. And 3, to identify the needs of victims of IHL violations other than justice and brainstorm ways to address them. So before we get into some of the exercises, I was hoping I could first start with a little activity. If you either scan this code, this QR code, or go to this site, the same one that Lisa used, and type in the following code, 8895-3315, it will ask you what 2 things come to mind when you think of accountability. So I'll allow you a minute or so to do this. And for our panelists, Thomas, Taya, Lisa, please, Olivia, please join in as well. It's going to be a little word cloud, so we'll get to see some of those answers. Hopefully it should work once we start getting, oh, wonderful. Right, so as these are coming in, I think these word clouds are so much fun, but I'll just keep going, and you guys feel free to keep adding your responses. But it basically shows us all of your answers, and the larger the word, the more times it has appeared in your answers. So as we can see here, there are a few like key concepts that we think of when it comes to accountability, like responsibility, justice, ownership. But what it also shows is that accountability comes in many forms and has many purposes. So this is something we'll explore in the following exercises. The first proposed exercise in the curriculum is to examine how we approach accountability and the effects of that approach. In this exercise, you'll ask your participants to position themselves in 4 corners or groups, as seen on the slide, according to their response to the following question. How should people who have broken the laws of armed conflict be treated when the armed conflict is over? One thing to note is that educators might want to explain that amnesty is an official forgiveness that authorities have granted at the end of hostilities to persons who took part in it, except for those suspected, accused of, or convicted of war crimes. Political crimes like treason or rebellion are often subject to amnesty. And when doing this exercise, it might also be good to recognize that every conflict is different and that there is no one right answer here. As Lisa demonstrated earlier, you can also do a Menti survey with your students, which is a great way to visualize the sentiment. Lisa also referenced the 1998 survey in the curriculum, which asked this question of people from 16 countries. So please feel free to use that in your own curriculum to illustrate public opinion, but do keep in mind that it is dated and opinions about certain approaches may have changed a bit since then. So after participants have positioned themselves, you can then delve into some questions directly related to the story about the child soldier. So maybe you ask participants who in that story violated IHL. Was it the commander? Was it the child? Was it both of them? And then based on these answers, you can then ask whether they want to change their position. You can move into the effects of each given approach. So how does criminal prosecution, being put on trial, affect the perpetrators of IHL violations? How does it affect the victims? How does it affect the society as a whole? And then repeat this for each of those 4 options. And again, it's best to relate this back to the story of the child soldier, so you have something to work off of, or a similar case study. In the child soldier sort of instance, participants may say that prosecuting the commander could restart the war, jeopardizing stability in the country, or that prosecuting the child is unjust and that he is in fact a victim himself. Another often debated issue is whether we should choose peace over justice following a conflict. That is, do we compromise and forego prosecutions with the hope that this will enable a society to establish stability and durable peace? Or does that breed a culture of impunity and fail to recognize victims? So basically, walk through the short and long-term effects of each approach and see how the discussion evolves. Following this discussion, you might want to ask if anyone wants to change their position. This exercise encourages participants to think through the impact that a given accountability approach may have on individuals and society, and which might ultimately impact how we decide to address violations of IHL. The second exercise examines who is responsible for bringing alleged perpetrators to justice. The three primary groups are courts, governments, and military commanders. In this exercise, students are given a set of phrases and asked to correctly connect the phrases to form a full sentence. These completed sentences relay the responsibilities of each group. And you can see the phrases here. So it's a fairly straightforward and quick exercise that enables participants to better understand how each group works to hold perpetrators accountable for IHL violations. So for example, the first set of phrases will ultimately read, the courts are responsible for trying and punishing persons who have committed grave breaches, and so on. So one way of illustrating these responsibilities is again through a case study. Some of you may know the case of Edward or Eddie Gallagher, a former Navy SEAL who gained significant attention due to his high-profile court-martial case in 2019. Gallagher was accused of war crimes committed during his deployment in Iraq in 2017. The various offenses included the murder of a teenage Islamic State fighter and the shooting of unarmed civilians. Fellow Navy SEALs who served with him reported that Gallagher had indiscriminately targeted and killed non-combatants, including women and children. And according to the accusations, he allegedly stabbed a wounded and captive teenage ISIS fighter to death, and then posed for a photograph with the body. During the court-martial, fellow SEALs testified against him, but their credibility was questioned, and one witness unexpectedly claimed responsibility for the death of the teenage fighter, contradicting his earlier statements that implicated Gallagher. This weakened the prosecution's case, and Gallagher was acquitted of the most serious charges. He was found guilty of posing for a photograph with the teenage fighter's body, a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This conviction carried with it a demotion in rank and a maximum prison sentence of 4 months, which he had already served during his pretrial confinement. While this trial was not without its faults, it demonstrates how military institutions work to address alleged violations committed by their own personnel during armed conflicts. It also illustrates the challenges and complexities involved in pursuing accountability. And the attention it received really underscores the importance of transparency to ensure public trust in the military justice system. So finally, the last exercise focuses on the victims rather than the perpetrators. You might first begin by asking participants to identify all of the victims of the child soldier, and then the specific needs of those victims, the needs that they have besides justice. So participants can then choose one of the needs they've identified and then develop a strategy for addressing it. One example may be the wife and child of a man that the soldier killed. While they may wish to see justice, they may also want to know exactly what happened to their husband or father. They may also require financial assistance if the man was the primary provider. Another example may be the child soldier himself. Perhaps he wants to know what happened to his mother and sister who fled following his father's death. There are a few accountability mechanisms that address these needs, including reparations, truth and reconciliation commissions, public apologies, fact-finding missions, reconnecting families, and the establishment of memorials and monuments to recognize and honor victims and survivors. Some of these methods address the needs of victims in practical ways, while others are more symbolic and work to acknowledge their experiences. South Africa is probably the most well-known example of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. It was established in 1995 following the end of apartheid, and it was intended to uncover the truth about past atrocities, promote accountability, and facilitate the process of national healing. And in Rwanda, an international criminal tribunal like that of the ICTY was created to prosecute some of the most high-profile perpetrators of the 1994 genocide. But this body could obviously not address all of the alleged perpetrators, which was estimated to be at around 130,000 people. So instead, a community-based justice system was implemented known as the Gacaca courts, focused on promoting communal healing. And then finally, since 1952, Germany has paid more than 80 billion euros in reparations to Holocaust survivors around the world. So these are just a few examples that can help to illustrate the variety of alternative accountability mechanisms that exist beyond traditional trials. Once participants have this list of victims and their needs, you might then wish to ask them the following questions. Who do you think should initiate these efforts? And who do you think should carry them out? Answers to both of these questions may include the international community, the government, non-governmental organizations and civil society groups, or the perpetrators themselves. This can open up a discussion about where the burden of addressing the needs of victims rests. Ideally, participants would understand that we all share in this burden and can contribute in a variety of ways. So I'll end on this slide with the following key takeaways from this section. First, states must establish laws to try and to punish those who commit grave breaches of IHL. The responsibility for enforcing IHL lies primarily with governments, but others can play a significant role. Bringing perpetrators to trial is not the only way to deal with violations of IHL, and many different perspectives must be considered to help societies move beyond the atrocities of the past. With that, thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions with the help from my colleagues. So Thomas, Taya, Lisa, please feel free to jump in as well. But I will pass it back to Taya now.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I have a couple questions in the chat. We can see who they would best be suited for. We have two questions about whether the Eddie Gallagher case is a good one to use as an example, given the political controversies subsequent. And if you have comments on that, Natalie, please feel free. I also want to call on both Thomas and Lisa to give some thoughts on that, and then I'll shoot some thoughts in at the end if there are still things to be said.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear from Thomas with his background. I think he's perfect to answer this, but I think it does illustrate the complexities of the system. And so, you know, we don't want to just necessarily give them these ideal cases. But with that, Thomas, please, you know, jump in.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear Lisa's perspective on how much students are actually aware of that aspect of some of this. I think, fortunately or unfortunately, there are a number of cases that you can look to for as teaching points from recent conflicts. I personally think it's important to draw from those more recent conflicts, specifically the last 20 or so years, because as great as something like Nuremberg or the Tokyo trials may be at showcasing some things, those can be really distant examples, things that have no real connection point in the students' lives. And at the end of the day, it's you have to weigh the options here. But I also like having some examples that aren't completely clean cut, that do represent what the law looks like in practice. It's not always easy. And that we like to think of something like Nuremberg as a lot of clean cut prosecutions that resulted in capital J justice. Those that know it know that it was a lot messier than that. So I think there is the modernity of it brings and the relevancy of it brings some value, I would think. But Lisa, I don't know if students that you've taught are sort of dialed into that sort of aspect of things like this.
Yeah, I would use the case study myself and then bring up the controversies as well, just so they can understand. Same idea of what Thomas was saying, that it's not just easy. It's not, black and white. It's got a lot of gray area to it. So yes, I would use it.
The only thing I would add, I think, is just a point from our Clara Barton competition, where we have law students grapple with this exact question, right? Where there is someone that has been prosecuted domestically for something, but somehow in the political process, they've been pardoned or something has happened. Has the country really dealt with this or have they not? Like, how does that really work when you are dealing with international criminal law, which is a mix of law and politics and international relations and diplomacy? This is sort of the complexity that we're dealing with, and they might not fully understand all of this. But so the same is true for law students and lawyers. Like, no one really knows the answer to any of this, and illustrating that complexity, I think, is important without delving into the nuances of the law. Is important to sort of be aware of, even for the younger students that are grappling with international criminal law and accountability, I think. Let's see. The other question we had is, what impact does time have on these trials? If they are long and drawn out, the public may lose interest and the judgment of perpetrators may be lessened. Do you want to comment on that, Natalie?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question, and I think it's one that we are consistently grappling with. Both the ICTY for Yugoslavia and the ICTR for Rwanda have been in existence, and they have residual mechanisms I think to this day, because it's been 20 years to prosecute some of these high profile perpetrators, and that's for a number of reasons. Some of them were on the run, others, it was about sort of just a longer process. There were a lot of documents that went through thousands and thousands of pages of documents. So these trials could have taken up to 10 years to go through. I think it is important that we recognize some of the drawbacks to having these longer drawn out trials, but there are also benefits to it. And that can be, whether we secure a conviction or a sentence that we feel strong, in, that we know that we've had all of the evidence, that we have all the witnesses that we can bring to the trial, and that we know we've done the most. But yeah, public interest is also an important thing, and I do think people lose that over time, unfortunately.
Anyone else want to comment on that question or add any insight?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah. Well, when I've taught this part, I actually have a friend that works at The Hague, and she's a lawyer, and we've zoomed in with her, and she's talked to my class about this. And one of the things that she says drives her, even though time is an issue and it seems to take forever, is the fact that she wants to make it right. You know, she wants to make sure that whatever the sentence becomes is the actual what it should be. And all families need to have some closure. And she says that even though it does take years, like Natalie was saying, that in the end, the families can sleep better at night and have that closure. So she's the lawyer that works kind of more on the defense side. And so she just wants to make sure that that person who's being charged is actually, should be charged.
And that time can also cause complications across the board, complications with evidence. People die, witnesses die. You hope to have some admissible form of evidence that might encapsulate their testimony or their experience, but there's no guarantees about that. It can make people change their mind. I think an important point that was brought out earlier is that a trial and conviction isn't necessarily what everyone sees as justice. It's not what everyone, no matter what our individual view on that is, it's just the reality of a situation in many parts of the world post-conflict. And so you'll have people that have a change of heart over time. They don't want to participate anymore. They don't want the trial's gone on long enough. They've lost faith in the system, or they've just changed their view on things. And so I think it's fodder for really good conversation as well. And I think, you know, a good framing device that I've found useful is the ongoing trials. They've tapered off as the individuals have gotten older, but as Germany sort of incrementally prosecutes concentration camp guards and others from that regime, as they build the case. I mean, a lot of these individuals are in their 80s, 90s, and that's a discussion point. Is, you know, what is not presupposing any right or wrong answer there, but to generate some conversation about that with all the sort of moral weight that's involved.
Great, thank you. The next and final question that I see, at least now in the chat, is: does the country injured have a say in the type of punishment or reparation that should occur?
So in this instance, I just wanted to ask for some clarity. Are we talking in cases where it's an international armed conflict? So there's one country that's the injured country and one that's the perpetrator, or, you know, in the more common conflict, which is the non-international armed conflict, and what we generally see, there isn't just, you know, one, like an injured country, you have injured groups, but, you know, and so I think in those instances where you have injured groups, there tends to be, in the transitional justice phases, there tends to be an initiative to, or there's a growing trend to get the perspectives from these injured people, the injured parties, and to sort of survey them and see what type of justice they want. And I think it's a very important trend that is growing, to ensure that we're actually working with the affected communities. But yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
I just wanted to add a little. I think it depends on, as Natalie pointed to, whether we're talking about an international armed conflict or a non-international armed conflict, but it also depends, it's situational, meaning it depends on what type of peace agreement was entered into, with the provisions in that typically lists out some of these things. It depends on whether an international or hybrid tribunal was established and what the mandate for that tribunal is. Sometimes the government will ask for an international tribunal to be created. Sometimes they will prosecute themselves. Sometimes it will be a hybrid, sometimes it will be completely outside of the country's control, and it'll be established by the UN Security Council, like we saw for the ICTY. And so all of these things sort of play into how much of a say the current government has. It depends on whether there even is a functioning government at the time, because obviously this is post-conflict, so there might not even be a government to speak on behalf of the country yet, or that hasn't been really cleared up yet. And so there are a lot of different things that can be going on. But as Natalie also pointed to, the trend is both at the ICC and at the more ad hoc tribunals that they try as much as possible to get the local needs incorporated into whatever international mechanisms they set up.
You're seeing this play out real time in Ukraine, and we have for the last 18 or so months. On one side, you have Ukraine, who has mounted a really complex and multifaceted legal offensive of their own, whether it's going before the UN. They're very public and continuing calls for a post-conflict tribunal to be set up with regard to the conflict. Their dealings with the ICC and legal arguments about jurisdiction there, since neither country or neither party to the armed conflict is a signatory to the Rome Statute. Or domestically, they expressed a desire early on to press cases in their domestic courts because they didn't want to necessarily wait until the dust settled and whatnot for cases that they felt they had enough evidence for conviction. And you've seen several of those go to trial in situations where the perpetrator, the accused, is in custody. I don't know that they've done very many trials in absentia where the defendant is not present. But you've seen across the board a wide variety of that sort of voice there. And arguably on the other side, whatever you, again, I interject no judgment on this sort of thing at all. But you've seen both the breakaway republics there in Donetsk and Luhansk set up their own sort of tribunals of sorts. And you've certainly seen Russia make public calls and outcries about certain Ukrainian actions, alleged actions, that sort of thing. So you have from both sides in this very public armed conflict, that exact sort of thing going on. And it's playing out very differently for both sides. And the public reception is very different depending on which party you're talking about, what measure it is that's at issue.
Any afterburners from either our audience or our panelists? Lisa, Natalie?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to Thomas's thing. Another good example of this sort of tension that exists between the country and maybe these international courts would also be the Rwandan tribunal, where when it was set up, when it was first established, there was support for it in Rwanda, but as things progressed and as decisions were made, that support sort of waned because the Rwandan government sort of wanted things dealt in another way. And so you saw them adopt their own sort of forms of justice, including the Gacaca courts that I had mentioned, which were really these very, I think Gacaca means short grass or something, because they happened in these fields, basically, these sort of informal trials that they did. So you do see that sort of tension between international, actors and the affected groups.
It seems like everyone has said everything that they wanted to say. I left it a little long and uncomfortable on purpose, but it seems like everyone has spoken their piece. I see nothing in the chat. So with that, I really just want to thank everyone for showing up, for participating in all of our different, in the chat and the mentees and in everything that we have thrown at you over the last 3 weeks, really. I'm really excited that you are excited, that you have good questions, that you have critical questions, that you have tips and tricks for each other, and that you've engaged with all of our educators that have come out to speak to you. And I hope that you email us if you have any questions. You all know that I've been desperately trying to share this one explanation of how you can implement this with you in the chat, and I've not been able to do that because I can't add attachments in the chat apparently, and so that'll come out in the emails after, as well as the link to the final recording, I assume, because you now already have the links for the first couple of ones. If you're impatient and you want to see them right away, follow our YouTube channel and get updates whenever we post something new. We have a lot of fun things coming up soon, I believe. I don't know if you want to make a plug for your Indiana Jones thing, Thomas, or...
Yeah, so tomorrow, geez, that would be real tragic for me if that were the case. Wednesday, June 28th, so Wednesday of this week at both 12 p.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern time, we're hosting an event on Indiana Jones and IHL. The event will feature a couple really great experts from the Smithsonian, both a Smithsonian Secretary Scholar who's a professional archaeologist and was actually educated at the same school as Indiana Jones, and the director of the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative. And then you also have to get stuck with myself, and you'll hear much more thoughtful commentary from Christian as well, if you're familiar with our legal advisor, Christian Jorgensen. But the four of us are going to combine. We'll have a lot of fun. We'll talk through legal and archaeological and cultural property protection issues. And I'll drop the registration links in the chat so you could take your pick of the 12 or the 8 p.m. event. Thanks, Taya.
Great. And finally, I really want to thank Natalie and Lisa for showing up today and sharing some great tips and tricks and some slides and some animations and everything that you could with us today. I really appreciate all of your hard work. And with that, I'll let everyone sign off. Maybe I'll wait until Thomas puts the link in the chat, but it's a goodbye from me at least.
Yeah, bear with me and I'll put it in just a second. Thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate everything. We hope that you help to get the message out about this great program and what it has to offer your students. I think hearing from some of the professionals that we've had across the board, hopefully is a really good selling point and proof positive that this stuff not only can be brought in a meaningful way into the classroom, but that it can make an impact on the students. So the links to the Indiana Jones event are in the chat there. And again, you can access the IHL recordings a little bit higher in the chat, as well as our YouTube channel. Just search Red Cross IHL program, find us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for everything. And please reach out if you have any questions. We're happy to help. Take care, everyone.